Anne, warm welcome to Startup Grind.
Thank you, Jens. It's so good to be here.
It's good to have you here. And we're really excited to dig into the productivity paradox today.
Yes, me too.
And as a start, could you give us a brief introduction about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I had a 25-year career in the data and market research world in insights. And that took me to live and work in Sydney, which is my hometown, in Hong Kong, which I love dearly, back to Sydney, and then most recently to Singapore. And in the last role in Singapore, I was leading some of our Southeast Asian markets, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Myanmar, which are three fabulous markets. If there's anyone from those markets, give me a shout in the chat. And I also had a regional product strategy role. So I loved my career in insights and loved what I was able to do and where I was able to travel. But I decided to launch my own thing called Productivity Bargain in mid-2024. So that was when I left the corporate insights world and went out as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and when we had a preparation call, you told me about you proposing something internally to your organization and about reducing the number of working hours. And you said in your words that you were shot down in flames. Was it that point when you said, okay, I need to have a different playbook. We need to do this in a different way?
Yeah, that was very definitely the moment that lit the fire for me. So let me share a little bit about what that moment was and what it triggered for me. So as I said, I was leading three of our Southeast Asian markets and I was struggling with a couple of challenges. One was how to attract and retain the top quality talent that we needed to deliver the results that our clients expected, the insights they wanted. And the second part of that was, how do I deliver more with less, which we all need to do, without burning out the people that I needed in order to deliver? And so these two really strategic challenges kept coming up again and again every year. And so in my 3-year strat plan a few years ago, I proposed a 4-day work week to my boss, who is the APAC CEO, to address these specific challenges. And that was the moment that I got shot down in flames and I was labeled not commercial, despite the fact that at this point I had turned 3 businesses around for that company that I was working with. So I was like, well, clearly I am commercial. So what's driving this like really strong reaction? And when I reflected on it, I thought, I think this strength of reaction actually was a fear reaction. Fear that if we allow people to work fewer hours, the business is going to suffer. And then if you unpack that further, it's really based on a false premise or an outdated understanding about how work actually happens and feeling like hours equals output. And so that was really the moment where I thought, I think that playbook is broken. That's not working anymore. And so let me build another playbook. And so I sort of built a change program to raise productivity without burnout by redesigning how we work. And that is Productivity Bargain. That was the moment then when once I knew that worked and I'd worked with a few clients and got amazing results, then that was the moment that I said, okay, right, now I'm pulling the trigger and I'm going to launch this thing.
Yeah. And I mean, the fear you mentioned, the genie out of the bottle, if somebody gets now, as you mentioned, we are operating in a system that our grandfathers designed, and it rewards the hours over outcomes. So let's start there. And I mean, I know from your YouTube videos that you've spoken about that we are in a sort of productivity in a 60-year low and burnouts are through the roof. So how did we end up here?
Yeah, this is the paradox, right? If productivity is not rising and yet we are working more and more and more and getting burnt out, that's not going to take us forward. So how did we get here? Well, this is the 100th anniversary this year of the 5-day working week. 1926 was when Henry Ford experimented with working. He was running his factories on 6-day weeks and he experimented with running them on a 5-day week. And then he went back to 6 days and then he went to 5 days. And he was the first, capitalist owner that proved that he got more output from his factories when they worked 5 days rather than 6. Actually, 10 years before that, during World War I, munitions factories in Britain were being asked to produce more output. And so they extended the shifts of their workers because of that very urgent need for munitions. and they didn't see any corresponding increase in output. And so they returned to the regular shifts that they had been doing, the 8-hour day. 100 years ago was when we kind of got to the 5-day week, 8 hours a day model. And as you alluded to, that worked for our grandfathers. And the world of work back then was very different, and the way society operated was very different. Where we are now is what I call a Medusa vine of busy work. So I don't know if you know that temple in Siem Reap in Cambodia that's in Lara Croft Tomb Raider. It's the one that's like totally overgrown by all the vines. And that vine is called a Medusa vine because when one root is cut, 2 more grow in its place so even if you try to get control of the vine, it just grows and grows out of control. And that is modern work. But instead of the roots of the vine, it's emails. One email begets 7 more emails. That's actually been quantified. If you send 1 email, it's going to create 7. Each meeting creates more meetings. One initiative finished means you've probably suddenly got 4 more things that are waiting for you to do or that are planned. And so there's this sense that we've created that busy is good and reactiveness is good. And there's an author and future of work expert who I follow called Cal Newport, and he wrote a book called A World Without Email, which I highly recommend. And he calls this the hyperactive hive mind of responsiveness, that each new technology that we've invented has created this expectation of responsiveness without actually raising productivity in any way at all, because we're just so busy running. And I'm sure everyone listening can probably relate to this and go, oh yeah, I get that.
Well, that was a good one. But I thought about the Medusa from the Greek mythology, and of course that's the same story.
Yes.
You cut one off, becomes 2. The only good one would be if you have 1 cup of coffee turns into 2, I guess.
I'll buy that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Emails and how you can use other tools and how they sort of spin into more. Why do you think that so many leaders kind of still default to this work harder, work longer, when kind of the evidence, the research says that well, it doesn't deliver better results?
Yeah. Well, 2 things, I think. One is I don't think many people have seen the evidence. So there is quite a big body of work that shows, beyond those experiments from a century ago, there have been modern experiments that show really conclusively that working fewer hours can lead to productivity, and we can unpack a little bit about why that is. But I think it's that we were all brought up in a world where, like we have sayings like time equals money. And when we start work, it's very much about this is the shift that we're going to do in our local cafe, or, it's very much like a time-based framing for work. And so I think what that does is, as people move through the system and move higher and higher, they bring those beliefs with them that, the hardest workers must be the best workers. And, there's real heroing of long hours and hustle culture. And, so there's this narrative that infuses a lot of the talk about work that is actually not based on data, but it sort of taps into what people feel like might be right, because that's what they knew when they were younger coming into the workplace. And so I think, to answer your question, why do we still default to this hours equals output? I think it's just conditioning, and we need to really deliberately find ways to disrupt that and change the culture around how we value time if we're going to get out of this Medusa vine of busyness.
And maybe it is, one way. So I had a manager who basically said, well, when you steer a big ship, it takes a while for it to turn. So you have to make decisions early. So if you know that you actually spent or worked those hours that particular day, that is something that you can measure, while the result, the sales, might come in, a week or 2 or a month later. So manager might have this feeling that I can control the hours right now, but I can't control the future.
Yeah. And that control dynamic, I think, is a key driver. I think you're spot on there. And we see that in the return to office debate that has gone around the globe. That's very much a control versus trust thing. Yeah. And I think the hours discussion is a similar thing around, what can I control? I can control hours. And it's, I think it's not easy to overcome that conditioning. I was chatting with a CEO of a startup sort of in the scale up phase. He's got around 100 employees and they've moved to a 9-day fortnight because he understands that how you work and what you work on and the outcomes you create are far more important than the number of hours that you use. And as we were talking, he said, yeah, we're in this really busy patch at the moment. And so we've actually suspended our 9-day fortnight and everyone's working 10-day fortnights. And then he was like, so I'm actually going against what I believe about how work, what real productivity is. And I think we're so trained to think productivity is busyness, but if you look at Warren Buffett, he famously says he quarantines 80% of his workday for reading and thinking. That is what he classifies as productivity. And so to your point around changing the cruise liner, well, yes, that's exactly why we should spend more time in planning and making sure we're making the right decisions and working on the right things in the right way. Because if we're not, that cruise line is long gone before we can pull that back.
Yeah, no, it's and technology, of course, now should help us with some of those things. In your keynotes, which I watched on YouTube, you talked about you always a first in and last out worker for years until sort of something major changed. Can you share a bit about that story?
So I was that person that was first into the office in the morning, last out of the office, always had, a million things going on. Loved it when people say, oh, you're so productive, you get so much done. That was me. And then I got pregnant. And in the lead up to having the baby and then coming back from maternity leave, I should say my daughter, shouldn't I? Not the baby. In the lead up to that, I was getting really anxious about how I would be able to do my job when I had the strictest constraint imaginable, which was that if I was late by 1 minute for pickup from the childcare, they would charge me, and they would charge me by every single minute that I was late. So I had to get out of the office. And what I realized was that constraint didn't mean that I couldn't do everything anymore. It meant that I focused, I prioritized, and I worked really efficiently in the time that I had so that I could get out the door. And I think like every student on a deadline knows this as well, right? It's actually that constraint of time that forces you to look at how you're working and what you're working on and find ways to do it better.
You hope that the childcare and they both did get its money, but at the same time, not so much money. Now, a lot of people here today, sort of from startups or enterprises, might be thinking, well, okay, yes, I hear you. This is really important, but how do I start and get my team and also in your case, as I said, the management. So tell us, what exactly is the productivity bargain and how does it work and how should people think?
Okay, so the productivity bargain is the idea that if you say to your people, if you can find a way to deliver your outcomes in less time, you get to keep that time. It unlocks this creative problem solving, innovation, and like motivation and engagement, that sense of I'm all in for this company to solve this problem because there's something in it for me. I do want to be really clear with everyone here. What I have learned since launching Productivity Bargain is that it doesn't have to be a 4-day week or a form of time off. That gift of time is incredibly valuable, even if it's for strategic thinking and focus, time to innovate and create, or team building and development, like whatever it is. The gift of it's actually not about the day. It's not about the Friday. It's about what you do on the Monday to Thursday to get control of that Medusa vine and create kind of calm and time and space in your work week so that you can have that gift of time at the end of the week. And so there's one really important thing about the productivity bargain, and this is literally why I called the company Productivity Bargain. It's a deal that you're making with people. So you're saying to people, if you can deliver the outcomes in less time, you get to keep that time. And the flip side of that is if you can't deliver the outcomes in less time, then you haven't created time. So you don't get it. And so that's that sense. What that unlocks is this ownership of problem solving And that is what actually creates the productivity gains and solves some of the challenges. Like if you say to anyone in your organization, do you have any frustrations or things that are getting in your way of delivering your outcomes? They'd be like, yeah, how long have you got? And so this, like the magic of this is that you're actually engaging them and chatting to them and saying, like, we hear you, we want to help you find ways to reduce those frustrations. And if you can figure it out, because you know your job better than we do, then there's something in it for you that is going to keep giving and giving much more than a bonus or something.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really, really good point. Now, as you said, you work with different organization, companies, and not everybody. I mean, I guess in the sense of the old slogan is that culture eats the strategy before breakfast. So from your experience, what usually kills a productivity initiative? Is it leadership not buying it, or is it the employees don't trusting it, or what should you look out for to make it actually happen?
I 100% believe culture eats strategy for breakfast. Like, yes, you need to have a strategy. That's a given. However, it's worth nothing unless you create the culture to deliver on that, to execute on it. And so, you know, what I was talking about just now with creating that collective desire to find better ways to deliver outcomes, that is all about creating a culture where time is the most valuable resource in the organization. And so, you know, you asked me what kills a productivity initiative. It's probably that it's an initiative. And, you know, like meeting free mandates that come down from the boss always fail. Like, I've never seen one work. And it's because, like, often the boss doesn't actually role model it themselves, so that kills it straight away. And that's the first rule of culture change, is like role model the culture that you want to invest in the organization. But the second is, it's not necessarily solving the real problem. And it's only when you take that bottom up lens and you engage everyone in the organization in solving those problems. Like, if everyone comes up and says, okay, meetings are the problem, it's probably not about having a day where no one has meetings. It's probably about totally changing the meeting culture so that you empower people to say no to meetings. You change your meeting etiquette. You know, one of the things that we do is we give people a North Star so that everyone, no matter what your level, you can make a decision about, is this the best use of my time right now? And that is when you see culture change. And that is when you see, like, you shift the system around productivity and by redesigning how work gets done rather than it's a, you know, tick box initiative.
Yeah, North Star is a really, really good one. And I think it kind of popularized by that book, Growth Hacking, to figure out what is the North Star of your company so that everybody can thrive in that or strive in that direction. Now, for people who are listening in today or listening to the video, what is the first practical step to make a productivity bargain with your team?
I always debate the answer to this question. So the sort of easy answer that's not the right answer is to say, do a productivity audit, because that's something that everyone goes, yep, I know what that is, let's go. But without the North Star, that's just going to, you know, potentially create chaos. And so actually what the right answer is start with outcomes. Set your vision and your goals to outcomes that you want this productivity bargain or actually the business to achieve, because then you can make good decisions about which productivity opportunities to pursue. It provides that decision-making framework around where you want to spend time. And so I think it goes back to the conversation we started with around that, you know, how we are trained at work, thinking about time, tasks, to-do lists. Those are all inputs. So when we reframe that to outcomes as the most important thing, it actually allows a lot more creative thinking about how to achieve those outcomes. One of the things I hear often from people is, well, you know, we can't possibly run any faster than we're running at the moment. Like we can't get everything done as it is. So how could I possibly get everything done in less time? And it's the wrong question, because what they're thinking is, these are all the inputs, all the things I must do, my tasks. How can I run faster and tick those off faster? And that's actually not what this is about. This is about saying, if that's my outcome, which of these tasks are even the right ones to be working on? What do I need to say no to? What are the things that I need to, process, improve? And I can talk to some of what some concrete things are that other organizations have done. But that's the bit where you actually can make system-wide changes when you redesign work with an outcomes lens.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point, because how would you know which, it's hard to make that say, okay, what should I take away and so on. Yeah. So if we're looking from, and I think you already actually gone into the practical perspective, what should we do? What does it look like when an organization shifts from measuring effort hours to measuring outcomes?
So let me answer that with a few examples to make it quite concrete, because I think otherwise I'll repeat myself. The easiest example, I think, for everyone to grasp is lawyers. Lawyers famously charge in 6-minute intervals, right? That is the definition of an input. What are you actually buying when you work with a lawyer? You want them to solve a problem that you have. You're buying a solution to a problem. And so wouldn't you want to work with a lawyer who is incentivized to find the best solution in the least amount of time, rather than incentivized to create more and more billing hours? So that would be better for 73% of lawyers experience burnout. So this is going to be better for the lawyers as well, right? So that's one example. So when we shift from billable hours to problem solved, that would be one example. Another, actually, one of my very first clients was my hairdresser. He said to me, this obviously wouldn't work for me because I make money when I cut hair. And we reframed his goal, his business metrics, as outcomes. We said, okay, instead of saying how many hours does he spend cutting hair, we said, how much profit does he make for each hour that the salon is open? And so that's an outcome that he can then be really creative in different ways of changing that outcome. So he could play around with his pricing. He could play around with what price at different times of the behavior he wanted to get his clients to. He could rent out other chairs in the salon. He could upsell products. He started a wedding business. So reframing it unlocks so much creativity in how to deliver those outcomes, rather than sort of thinking very one in, one out, input, output type of lens.
Yeah, and I think that it's a very good point, like the hairdresser, because I thought, well, how could you? Well, you can use a shaver quicker, but yeah, how do you make the most profit out of your hour? Yeah. And then, as you said, being creative, and then maybe market different products that actually has more value in the. And the
thing with Zig, the hairdresser, he actually was able to reduce his working hours 30%. He used to work 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. 6 days a week. And he was able to reduce that crazy schedule by 30%, and sales did not drop because of this reframe. And then the productivity opportunities that we were able to identify given that reframe around outcomes.
And now we also then have sort of the new tool that we all want to use in 2026. AI is also stepping into this. So we are can we use this in some way? So we also have I guess for the hairdresser, needs to be on site, but we have remote and hybrid and all that. What do you see as the biggest opportunities that most organizations are not seeing, and what should they do?
There's so many parts to that question to unpack. The first comment is there are some common things which many organizations identify the opportunities. Despite everyone should know better, almost always things are an issue, sales are an issue, and workflow accountability as part of that. And how do I know when things are done, or how do I make sure things don't get missed, or how do I avoid? But I think workflow systems and process is a massive opportunity. You and I are going to have more conversations about this because it's something we're both super passionate about. But I think there are some really obvious things there. To answer your question, though, what are the things that that organizations overlook. So one of my favorite things to do is actually a productivity audit, because at the start of a productivity audit, I ask them, what are your fears? And inevitably someone will say, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's possible. We're running so fast, da, da, da. And then we look at 4 key areas in depth. And that's the whole like seeing the business with different eyes. And I'll share them here. So the first is creating time for deep work. And there's a number of different things we look at there. And every single organization I have worked with isn't able to create and protect time to think and do deep work. And that is actually what drives your future business success. So that's kind of the big thing. Second is systems, processes, and automation. And there's a lot to unpack around that in every organization, and it looks very different depending on where they're at. The third is interpersonal effectiveness. And this is probably the piece that is the real answer to your question, what do people overlook? Because if you think about high-performing teams that are hitting goals, having fun, being creative, coming up with new ideas, and like just high-performing, and you compare that with teams that are so dysfunctional and political that they can't tie their own shoelaces without having a fight about it, the productivity gap is immense, right? So interpersonal effectiveness and leadership skills is the biggest productivity lever that we never call a productivity lever. And then the fourth bucket is well-being. So mental, physical, and social well-being, so that you can bring your A game in the time that you have given yourself to deliver your business as usual work. One of the things that I think is the most critical when we talk about AI in this picture is being very deliberate about using AI to create and protect space rather than just do more. And I think that is the biggest danger that I see is there are 2 big dangers I see in using AI. One is using it just to create more and do more and go faster without actually using it to create space and do less. The second is just jumping in and running with it without stopping and planning and figuring out what's the problem I want AI to solve for me. That's where the audit actually is incredibly valuable, to say, well, let me first prioritize and then act and figure out how AI is really going to make the maximum difference.
And you've given us so much information today. It's rethinking and redesigning how things get done. So if there's one thing that you want everyone who listens in today or watches the video to take away, what would it be?
Don't wait to feel like you have time to create time. Like I learned when I was that mum coming back from maternity leave, you actually need to put the constraint in place first and say, this is the amount of time I am going to allow for business as usual, and then find ways to deliver your outcomes in the time that you allow. But if you say, oh, I'll do that when I've got enough time, that day will never arrive.
That's a very good one. Yeah. At Startup Grind, we also asked the question, how do you keep yourself updated in regards to productivity and work and so on? What sources do you follow and what do you recommend that people listen into?
So LinkedIn is a goldmine. Like I really deliberately find people to follow on LinkedIn, and then I make friends with them on LinkedIn. Like you were saying at the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, I totally do that. And some of the best and most stimulating conversations I've had, and the amount that I've learned from people who I have become LinkedIn friends with and then real life friends with, blows my mind. So for me, that's the number one. But also reading, like just going into a bookshop and having a look at what are the new titles, for me always unlocks ideas. So, some of my favorites are Cal Newport, who I talked about, A World Without Email, Jenny Blake, who has a book called Free Time that a lot of the productivity bargain program sort of built on her ideas. Adam Grant is always brilliant. So, there's a number of authors that I also really value going deep into their worlds in the books that they write.
Yeah, and we can of course link to those authors in the video description so you can easily find them. And it's been amazing to have you here today. Thank you for taking your time and sharing everything with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
How do people best reach out to you? How do we connect with you, or how can people reach out to you in the best way?
Yeah, so definitely LinkedIn. Please connect with me, chat with me. I love LinkedIn conversations and getting to know people. I also have a little tool to give to everyone as well. So we'll put that in the chat. It's a diagnostic tool. So you asked me where to start, and I said, just do it. But possibly a more helpful answer would have been, let me share this tool with you, because it's a diagnostic that tells you like how ready are you, I guess, to create that constraint of time and make it work for you, but also diagnoses specifically where across those 4 pillars that I mentioned should you be focusing first. You know, if that's a conversation you want to continue, or even if you don't want to continue and you just want to use the tool, that's absolutely fine. We'll put it in the chat, and I look forward to any conversations that we have together on LinkedIn.
And once again, thank you for being a guest at Startup Grind in this joint event between Hong Kong and Zurich. What we're going to do now is I'm going to bring Amrit Sethi on stage. So hold on for a second. I'm going to